Manhattan sparkled that night, but nothing glittered brighter than the rumors swirling around the Caldwell Industries Winter Gala. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, boardroom expert, and the man every headline wanted, had just arrived. But the story wasn't about him, not tonight, not after she walked in, because the one woman who wasn't meant to be there was the one who would rewrite everything. Ethan moved through the gala like a man born to command a skyline. Cameras angled, investors straightened their jackets, assistants whispered his name like it was a password. Then, the shift, a ripple, a pause, a silence that felt intentional. Isla Morgan stepped inside, a stunning black woman in a midnight gown, walking like she owned the very air she breathed. But what caught Ethan wasn't her beauty, it was her calm. She wasn't starstruck, wasn't dazzled, wasn't even impressed. She was searching, not for attention, for someone. Ethan watched her move toward the champagne table, pulling something from her clutch, a gala invitation. Except the invitation wasn't the official design, a fake. His interest sharpened instantly. He approached her, voice low. "Enjoying the view?" She smiled without looking at him, trying to decide if the glass ceilings in here are real or just decorative. Ethan blinked. The line hit him clean, sharp, unforgettable. She finally turned to him, eyes warm but unreadable. "People look at me like I don't belong," she said softly. "But that's fine. I didn't come here to be seen." A question curled in his chest. "Then why did you come?" She leaned closer, just enough for only him to hear. "To find you." Ethan's breath stalled for the first time in years. Before he could ask why, she stepped back, expression smooth again, as if she hadn't just set his pulse on fire and his instincts on high alert. The orchestra swelled, his thoughts tangled. Anything safe about the night vanished. "Come to the private after-party," Ethan said, trying to regain control. "If you're looking for me, you'll have me there." She held his gaze, steady, assessing. "Lead the way, Mr. Caldwell." The words left Isla's lips with a calm confidence Ethan felt in his chest. He didn't reply. He simply guided her out of the ballroom, ignoring the subtle shift in attention as they passed. Whispers rising, curiosity sharpening, cameras drifting their way. Isla walked beside him with a grace that made the opulent hall look like it was trying too hard. They reached the private elevator reserved only for Ethan and a handful of executives. He pressed his thumb against the panel, and the doors slid open with a soft chime. Inside, the mirrored walls caught Isla's reflection. Elegant, unbothered, undeniably present. Ethan was used to reading people quickly. With her, there were no easy angles. The elevator rose, humming quietly. She didn't speak, but her silence wasn't awkward. It was steady, self-assured, like she understood the weight of being close to powerful men and refused to shrink under it. That quiet composure did something to him, something he wasn't prepared to name. When the doors opened, the city rushed forward in one endless sweep of lights. Ethan's penthouse stretched wide, all black marble and warm gold accents, a quiet contrast to the noise of Manhattan below. Isla stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of a velvet sofa, as if testing the texture of his world. "So this is where you disappear when the board makes your head hurt," she murmured, her voice carrying a teasing edge. "You assume I hide," he said, stepping closer. "Everyone hides," she replied. "Some just do it in nicer places." Her gaze met his, steady, unflinching. Something flickered in him, sharp and magnetic, the kind of pull he'd spent years ignoring. He reached for her, not out of habit but out of instinct, and when his hand touched her waist, the moment snapped into clarity. The kiss happened fast and deep. Hours melted away in the dark. The city kept shining below them, indifferent to how completely the night had just rewritten both their lives. At some point, Isla sat beside him, knees drawn to her chest, watching the skyline instead of him. "You ever wonder what it costs you to carry all that power?" she asked softly. Ethan leaned back on his palms, studying her profile illuminated by the city glow. Power doesn't come with a bill. She looked at him then, and her eyes said she didn't believe him. Everything comes with a bill. The honesty in her voice unsettled him. No one spoke to him like that. Not without agenda, not without fear. She wasn't impressed by the room, the view, or him. She saw past it, past him. And that was the moment everything started to shift. She leaned her head against his shoulder, unexpected, uninvited, but not unwelcome. For the first time in too long, he felt still. But stillness was dangerous. Stillness made space for thoughts he didn't want. When her phone buzzed against the floor by the bed, Isla reached for it quickly, too quickly. Ethan noticed the flicker of worry that crossed her face as she turned the screen face down. "Everything okay?" he asked. She hesitated a second too long. "Yes, just life." The answer was harmless, yet something in him locked up. A reminder of the line he never crossed, the rule he'd lived by. Never get pulled into someone else's gravity. He stood abruptly as if the air had become too tight. "You should get dressed." Isla's head lifted, confusion slipping into her expression. "Ethan, what's wrong?" "Nothing." A lie shaped into a polished tone. But this was only meant to be one night. She stared at him, a soft hurt forming in her eyes. Not dramatic, not pleading, just real. "And that's it?" He looked away. "Yes." He walked out before she could respond. The sharp click of the door dividing the suite into two worlds, hers and his, both suddenly colder. By the time Isla finished dressing, the elevator had already taken him somewhere she couldn't reach. She left quietly, her footsteps echoing through the penthouse like a goodbye she wasn't allowed to say. Days turned into weeks. The nausea hit one morning, sudden and disorienting. The test she bought on her lunch break trembled in her hands as she waited for the result. A long breath, a quick prayer, a silent disbelief. 2 lines. Her knees weakened. She pressed a hand to her stomach, tears gathering, not from fear, not from joy, but from the sharp, overwhelming truth that life had just changed in a way she could neither escape nor undo. Ethan Caldwell had abandoned her, but not before leaving a piece of himself she could not ignore. A piece growing inside her, a piece that would shift the shape of both their worlds. That truth settled in her chest like a weight she couldn't lift, but somehow had to carry. Isla stared at the faint blue lines again, as if they might change, as if the world might rewind to a night where desire hadn't rewritten her entire future. But the lines stayed. The silence of her small apartment stayed. Her heartbeat stayed. Louder than her thoughts, steadier than her breath. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone clutched so tightly her fingers numbed. She didn't want magic. She didn't want promises. She wanted honesty. Simple, human, bare. A conversation, an explanation, a moment of truth. Her thumb hovered over Ethan Caldwell's number. She inhaled, held it, and pressed call. 1 ring, 2, 3. The robotic voice answered her for him. "The number you have reached is unavailable. Please leave a message." She hung up, called again and again. Finally, with a breath she didn't trust, she sent a message instead. "Ethan, I need to talk to you. It's important." Minutes dragged, then an hour, then a night. No reply. The next morning she tried again, pacing near her tiny kitchen counter where the smell of unbuttered toast still lingered untouched. "Ethan, please, just one conversation." Nothing. By afternoon, her hope began to split at the seams. By evening, the truth became a bruise she could no longer pretend wasn't there. She wasn't being ignored. She was being erased. A quiet panic gathered beneath her ribs, not from the pregnancy itself, but from the realization that the man who had held her like a secret, kissed her like a promise, and left her like a shadow, wasn't coming back. She sank onto the sofa, her arms curling protectively around her abdomen. It wasn't a conscious gesture, it was instinct, the kind that rises in women who know they must stand alone before they're ready. A single tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, almost angrily, as if softness were a luxury she could no longer afford. "All right," she whispered into the stillness. "We'll do this ourselves." Her voice didn't tremble. Her resolve did not waver. She opened her laptop, stared at the glowing screen, and began searching for new apartments. Cheaper ones, safer ones. Somewhere she could build a quiet life without waiting for a man who couldn't be bothered to hear her voice. In another part of the city, miles above her in a world of glass walls and relentless ambition, Ethan Caldwell sat in a boardroom flooded with sharp white light. Screens glowed with financial projections. Executives argued without listening. A crisis loomed. Acquisition trouble, shareholder distrust, headlines sharpening like knives. Ethan's jaw tightened as another advisor spoke in anxious circles. "Your absence last week put us behind, Ethan. Investors need reassurance. We're on unstable ground unless you—" He lifted a hand, silencing the room. His patience stretched thin. The night with Isla had left him with a clarity he couldn't decipher, and a tension he couldn't shake. He hadn't slept. He hadn't wanted to face the shift she'd caused. So he did what he always did. He buried it beneath work, beneath power, beneath the version of himself that didn't feel. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, but he didn't check it. He never did during meetings, especially meetings where the future of Caldwell Enterprises hung by a thread. He didn't know that the message he ignored wasn't about business, wasn't about the company, wasn't about anything he thought mattered. It was about the life growing quietly in a woman who had once made him feel something he didn't know how to face. The meeting continued. Ethan's mask stayed fixed. The empire demanded him. And Isla Morgan, heartbroken, pregnant, alone, learned what it meant to rebuild from ashes she never asked to hold. The next morning wasn't gentle. There was no dramatic sunrise, no comforting music, no miracle that softened the reality tightening around her chest. There was only her alarm buzzing at 6:15 a.m., the smell of last night's untouched toast still lingering in the air, and the quiet knowledge that no one was coming to save her. She wrapped her arms around herself as she stood in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes looked different, still warm, still intelligent, still her, but touched now with something steadier, something older, something that didn't leave room for illusions. Pregnant, alone, and somehow determined. She started packing. Her studio apartment had always been cramped, but today it felt suffocating. The peeling paint, the ancient radiator that clanged in the night, the window that never fully closed, none of it was meant for a child. She folded her clothes into boxes, placing small notes on the lids. Kitchen, bathroom, baby. The last label made her throat tighten, but she didn't stop. By the afternoon, she was riding in the back of a cab toward Harlem, a quieter part, warmer somehow despite the winter chill. The buildings weren't polished, the streets weren't symmetrical, but there was something honest about them, something human. Her new apartment was small, but sunlight spilled through the windows in wide, generous stripes. The floors creaked softly when she walked, but she liked that. She liked that the walls seemed to hold stories that didn't judge hers. She spent the evening assembling a second-hand dresser she'd bought online, pausing every few minutes when nausea rolled through her. She breathed through it, took tiny sips of ginger tea, and kept going. Her hands were steady, her resolve sharper than it had ever been. She bought prenatal vitamins. She switched to lighter shifts at work. She researched hospitals. She ate what she could stomach. She slept when sleep allowed. She woke up every day and fought her fear with quiet, relentless courage. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she grew stronger. Nights were the hardest. When the city softened into a hum and she lay alone in her new bed, she would place a hand over her stomach, wondering who this small life would become, wondering if they would have her eyes or his, wondering how she would explain the beginning of their story. She never cried for Ethan, not anymore. She cried for the child that deserved better. Across the city, in a world far removed from her warm-lit apartment, Ethan Caldwell stood alone in his vast penthouse, staring out at Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling glass. The skyline burned gold against the night, but he felt none of it. He'd spent the entire week drowning in meetings, snapping at executives, pushing past exhaustion with a precision that startled even him. But tonight, when the noise finally died and the silence settled around him, Isla's voice rose in his memory like a whisper he couldn't unhear. "Everything comes with a bill." He had laughed at that, dismissed it, pretended it didn't matter. But now, something twisted in his chest, sharp and unwelcome. Regret, not fully formed, not spoken, just a small, insistent pressure. He replayed the night, her laugh, the way she leaned into him, the softness he hadn't expected, the honesty he hadn't known how to hold. He felt a flicker of something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Not guilt, not longing, but the sense that he had left something unfinished. Something that didn't stay behind. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't dial her name, didn't admit he wanted to. But the first crack had formed, and deep in her apartment, Isla lay with a hand on her growing stomach, unaware that somewhere across the city, Ethan Caldwell, king of steel and glass, was losing the one thing he valued most: control. Ethan spent the next week in a haze he would never admit to. The image of Isla standing on that quiet Manhattan sidewalk, strong, composed, unreachable, had carved itself somewhere he couldn't scrub clean. He threw himself into work, into meetings, into the kind of ruthless focus that usually drowned everything else. But nothing drowned her. So when Caldwell Industries hosted a mid-year partner mixer at a sleek midtown rooftop lounge, Ethan intended to be in and out in under an hour. Shake hands, smile just enough. Leave before the small talk suffocated him. He had no idea Isla Morgan would walk in. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't part of this world anymore, or so he thought. But when she stepped through the glass doors wearing a fitted emerald dress that made heads turn without her trying, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused. Even the skyline behind her seemed to frame her on purpose. Ethan's breath actually stalled. She's here? He felt the impact before he could hide it. Isla saw him seconds later. Her expression didn't change. No shock, no emotion, not even the flicker of old hurt. Just calm, poised neutrality. Her chin lifted. She carried herself like a woman who had rebuilt her life brick by brick and no longer owed the world explanations. Ethan, on the other hand, felt something tighten under his ribs. Throughout the evening, he found his attention drifting toward her in ways that irritated him. She spoke confidently to stakeholders, engaging with ease and intelligence. At one point, she laughed at something someone said, soft, warm, the kind of laugh he remembered far too well. And that was when it hit him. She wasn't the girl he left. She was a woman now, a woman who didn't need him. Their eyes met once across the room, only a second, but it was enough. She looked away first, not out of discomfort, out of dismissal. Ethan felt the sting of it more than he expected. He told himself to focus on business, on numbers, on anything logical. But every time he glanced back, she was there, effortless, composed, beautiful in a way that felt like a quiet threat to his self-control. The question pulsed in him. Why is she here? Who invited her? And why does it matter so much that she didn't look at me twice? As the event drew to a close, Isla stepped toward the exit, her posture straight, her pace unhurried. Ethan instinctively moved too, weaving through people, the need to speak to her rising before he could stop it. He was just a few steps away when someone called his name, his CFO with a contract that required urgent review. Ethan hesitated, looked at the paper, then looked up toward the doors. Isla was gone. He stood there, pulse unsettled, torn in a way he hadn't been in years. What neither of them could deny, no matter how much they pretended, was the spark sat between them, unresolved, undeniable. And Isla felt it long after she stepped out of the rooftop lounge and disappeared into a waiting cab. Her heart, however, refused to entertain what her body remembered. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let old wounds reopen. The following weeks reminded her exactly why she couldn't afford distractions. Isla Morgan had become a force. At her marketing agency, she wasn't just the gifted strategist anymore. She was the one clients specifically requested. Her pitches were bolder, cleaner, sharper. Her confidence made rooms stop and listen. She had the kind of presence that didn't need a last name or a billionaire's shadow to validate her worth. She was doing just fine on her own. But life had a way of adding unexpected layers just when she felt stable. It began with an old box she discovered while helping her aunt clean out a storage unit in Harlem. A weather-worn wooden chest with a faded crest on the lid, two crossed branches encircling a small, hand-drawn crown. Isla didn't recognize it, but her aunt froze when she opened it. And inside were documents, letters, and family records, and a surname Isla had never heard, but was apparently tied to her bloodline. Her aunt's voice trembled slightly. "It's time you knew where you came from." As Isla sifted through the papers, a strange truth unfolded. Her lineage wasn't simple. Her great-grandparents had owned land, significant land, property that had been quietly absorbed into corporate hands over the decades. Some of it, according to old newspaper clippings, had ended up under the control of Caldwell Industries. Ethan Caldwell's empire. Isla blinked, stunned, but her aunt shook her head gently. "Child, this isn't about revenge. It's about understanding who you are." Still, a chill prickled across her skin. What are the odds? The name Caldwell echoed through her mind, pulling up memories she had spent years sealing away. The rooftop, the night he left, the silence, the pain she had been forced to turn into strength. Now her roots, her family, her history seemed entwined with the very company he ran. Across the city, Ethan had begun noticing small anomalies in old acquisition files, old land purchases, and inheritance disputes buried in legal archives. Things that raised questions he couldn't answer. He didn't know the woman at the center of the mystery was Isla. He didn't know her newfound heritage might collide with his empire. But the collision was coming, and Isla, standing in her small but warm apartment, with those papers spread out on her coffee table, felt a shift she couldn't fully understand. Power, truth, possibility. She had built her life from scratch. Now it seemed her past might reshape her future, and she had no idea just how deeply Ethan was connected to it. The next morning, Isla left her building with a folder tucked under her arm, heading toward the subway. She didn't notice the black town car idling near the curb, sleek, tinted, corporate. She only noticed the sharp click of its door opening behind her. "Isla." She froze. Ethan Caldwell stepped out of the car. Not by coincidence, not by luck, and not because he had been searching for her personally. Her agency had been hired that morning for a preliminary consultation with Caldwell Innovation Group. She was the assigned project lead, and Ethan, uncharacteristically, had insisted on joining the briefing. Slowly, Isla turned. "You're early," she said, keeping her voice level. He nodded once, controlled and unreadable. "I saw your name on the project list. Thought it would be better to speak before we walked into a room together." Better for who, she wasn't sure. Ethan's gaze moved over her. Professional, but too aware. The breeze tugged at her coat, and her pulse fought to stay steady. "You didn't have to come here," she said. "The meeting is at 10. We could have spoken then." His jaw tightened. "I didn't want the first time we talked in years to be across a conference table." The honesty startled her. Quick, unguarded, almost vulnerable, but she didn't soften. She couldn't. "So what is this, Ethan? Courtesy or damage control?" He exhaled, eyes flicking away for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "It's acknowledgement and responsibility, and maybe something I should have done a long time ago." Responsibility. The word landed heavily between them. She shifted the folder in her grip, steadying herself. "We have nothing to revisit. The past is the past. Let's keep this professional." He stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough that the memory of his warmth pressed against the present. "Professionally," he said softly, "I need you on this project. Personally, ignoring you tonight would feel like lying." Her breath stalled, not because of what he said, but because of what she felt he wasn't saying. She forced the walls back up. "Then don't lie, but don't pretend you're here for anything more than business." His expression flickered. Regret, confusion, longing. A mix he couldn't disguise fast enough. "Isla," he said quietly, "you've changed." "People do," she replied, "especially when they're left to rebuild." The impact hit him. She saw it in the stillness of his breath, in the way his eyes sharpened as if trying to understand something he'd missed years ago. Before he could speak again, she stepped past him, pulling open the passenger door of the waiting car. "Let's go," she said, settling in. "We'll be late for your meeting." Ethan followed her inside, the space between them more charged than any moment at the gala. He didn't know the truth, not about her growth, not about her child, not about the history her lineage carried, but he would, sooner than either of them were ready for. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, the city sliding past in a blur of glass, steel, and morning light. Isla kept her gaze forward, body angled just slightly away from Ethan, as if distance could dull the intensity sitting between them. It didn't. Silence stretched, taut and sharp, not comfortable, not empty. A silence made of everything they never said, everything they shouldn't say now. Ethan finally spoke, voice low, almost careful. "You've built an entire life since I last saw you." Isla didn't turn. "Most people do, Ethan. Time forces you forward." His jaw tightened at the quiet edge beneath her words. "I didn't expect seeing you again would feel like this." "Like what?" she asked, still watching the city blur. "Like the past isn't finished with me." She exhaled through her nose, slow, controlled. "It shouldn't matter anymore." "But it does," he said quietly. "To me, it does." His honesty scraped across old wounds. Isla shifted and for the first time looked at him, fully. Ethan's eyes held something rawer than she prepared for. Not longing, not apology. Something trapped between the two. "Ethan," she said softly, "you can't rewrite what happened." "And I'm not trying to," he answered. "I'm trying to understand it. Understand you." Her breath caught, not from flattery, but from the ache of remembering how easily this man caused damage without meaning to. The car slowed in midtown traffic. A horn blared. A cyclist shouted. But inside, everything remained painfully still. "You don't get to understand me now," Isla said, voice steady but trembling underneath. "Not after disappearing without explanation." His expression changed, just slightly like a crack in stone. "I thought leaving was the right thing," he murmured. "For who?" she asked. He didn't answer. Couldn't. The car made a sharp turn, and their shoulders brushed. Electricity surged, unwanted, intrusive, familiar. Isla pulled back instantly. Ethan didn't. "You feel that," he whispered. She closed her eyes for a second. "Feeling something doesn't make it good." "Or wrong," he countered. The car slowed as they approached the tower. Ethan leaned forward and tapped the panel to stop the ride before it reached the entrance. "Why are we stopping?" Isla asked. "Because," he said, turning to her, "walking into that building pretending I feel nothing is a lie I can't sustain." Her pulse stumbled. Heat rushed through her. Frustration tangled with desire, and resentment clipped both. "Ethan," she said quietly, "you don't get to want clarity now. Not when you didn't want answers before." His breath slipped out, shaken, controlled, defeated but still reaching. "Then tell me what I should want," he said. "Because right now, all I want is to stop acting like the past doesn't exist." For the first time, Isla looked at him without armor, and that was the moment everything inside her twisted. "Ethan," she murmured, "the past changed me. You don't know who I am anymore." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then let me learn." She shook her head softly. "That's the problem. You want to learn the woman standing in front of you, but you left the one who needed you most." The words hit him like a physical blow, silent, heavy, devastating. Neither spoke. The car rolled forward again, unrequested, as if the city itself refused to let them stay still. As the tower came into view, Isla looked away from him, steadying her breath. Unresolved feelings simmered between them, dangerous and rising fast. Neither desire nor resentment was winning. Both burned too brightly to fade. When the doors finally opened, neither moved. The past wasn't finished, the present wasn't ready, and the future was growing impatient. Ethan felt it the second he stepped out of the car and into the elevator, an invisible pressure curling under his ribs, tightening with every passing floor. By the time he reached his office, something inside him had already shifted, a restlessness he couldn't explain and couldn't push away. He tried to bury himself in work. It didn't cooperate. On his desk, a stack of acquisition files awaited approval. Routine, predictable, harmless. At least they should have been. But as he skimmed through them, one folder caught his eye. A land transfer case from nearly 30 years ago, tied to one of Caldwell Group's earliest expansion projects in New York. He frowned. The details didn't match the archives he remembered. The original deed listed an old family, owners of a sizable plot just outside Manhattan. But the purchase file showed a different name, one Ethan didn't recognize, listed as the seller. No transition records, no probate documentation, no legal trail. Nothing about it made sense. And the strangest part? The family crest stamped on the deed, a faint ink symbol of crossed branches encircling a tiny hand-drawn crown, pulled at his memory like a tug from the dark. He had seen that symbol recently, but where? He leaned back, exhaling slowly, trying to trace the thought. It came to him in a sudden flash. Isla, her file. No, her bracelet. During the boardroom presentation, a glint of metal had caught his attention on her wrist. A small engraved symbol, the same crest, the same crown. His pulse kicked once, hard. It couldn't be a coincidence. Ethan pulled up digital archives, moving through decades-old property transfers, lawsuits, restructures. The more he dug, the more inconsistencies emerged. Missing signatures, overwritten names, property lines that had been quietly redrawn, a whole piece of history distorted, and somehow tied to Isla's family. He didn't know the details, not yet, but something in his gut told him the truth would not be soft and it would not be simple. A soft knock at the door pulled him out of his thoughts. "Mr. Caldwell," his assistant said, leaning in, "your legal team is here for the contract review." "Give me 10 minutes, he replied. She nodded and left. Ethan stood pacing once across the room. He knew he should focus on the meeting, but the files on his desk felt like a heartbeat, urgent, pulsing, demanding attention. He picked up the deed again, running a thumb over the faded crest. Isla's face rose in his mind, calm, controlled, brilliant, guarded. And underneath all that hurt, he was beginning to see clearly for the first time. What else had he failed to see? As the city buzzed beyond his windows, Ethan felt a new unease weaving itself into his thoughts. A sense that his empire wasn't as clean as he'd believed. That somewhere in the foundation of Caldwell Industries, there were shadows he had inherited without knowing. Shadows that somehow belonged to Isla. He closed the folder with a quiet snap, the decision already forming. He needed answers. He needed the truth. He needed to understand how she fit into all of this. But he wasn't ready for the possibility that he might be standing on top of the very thing that once belonged to her bloodline. The tension settled in his chest, heavy, insistent, and impossible to ignore. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the ground beneath his certainty begin to shift. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was still circling the same thought. Why Isla? Why did the anomalies, the contract, and the buried history all suddenly lead back to her? The idea sat in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake off. As he stepped into the executive floor, he didn't expect to hear his name so quickly. "Ethan, hold on," Melissa, one of the firm's senior partners, called out. Her tone was light, conversational, but with something underneath. "I ran into Isla the other day. She looks good. Happier." Ethan stopped. "You know Isla?" he asked carefully. Melissa raised a brow. "Of course. She used to intern here, back when you didn't look up from your desk long enough to notice anyone." Then she added almost offhand, "I didn't know she had a child now. Must be keeping her busy." The world stopped. A cold pulse moved through Ethan's veins, sharp and disorienting. Child? His voice sounded wrong, too quiet, too strained. Melissa shrugged. "Yeah, someone mentioned it at the mixer last week. Cute kid from what I heard. Didn't ask for details." Ethan didn't move. Couldn't. Isla, a child, a timeline that lined up too perfectly. A possibility he had never allowed himself to imagine, and now couldn't escape. Melissa didn't notice the shift in him. "Anyway, I'm late for a call." She waved and walked off. But Ethan remained rooted in place, Every thought spiraling. Was it possible? Had she? Had he? He forced himself toward his office, but his chest felt tight. The past clawed at him, her soft laughter in the half-lit room, the way she held on to him that night as if trying to memorize something she couldn't name, the way he left before dawn like a coward, convinced he was protecting them both. Inside his office, he shut the door and leaned against it. He shouldn't care. He shouldn't want to know. He shouldn't feel this sudden, crushing heat behind his ribs. But he did. More than was reasonable. More than was safe. A knock broke through the haze. It was Daniel from finance carrying a thin folder. "Sir," Daniel said, stepping inside, "about the anomaly investigation. There's something odd about the beneficiary listed in the old contract. The surname matches one of the families tied to an inheritance dispute 19 years ago. The same lineage connected to Ms. Rivera." Ethan froze. First the lineage, now the child. Everything was circling Isla. "Do you want me to keep digging?" Daniel asked. Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes," quietly. Once Daniel left, Ethan sank into his chair. A child, her lineage resurfacing, anomalies pointing toward her life in ways he didn't yet understand. And Isla herself, moving through New York with a strength he admired more than he wanted to admit, had kept this from him. His pulse throbbed in his jaw. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she face everything alone? Why does it matter this much to me? He didn't have the answers. But he knew one thing with startling clarity. Whatever Isla was hiding, it was no longer just her secret, and he was done pretending he didn't care.